Look at how far city development has come. Organic lots, beautiful, vibrant streets, and a simulation that isn't... Wait a minute! That's not Cities Skylines 2. You see, in the 2 years since Cities 2 released, really, at times it feels like not a lot has changed. It's been pretty rough, and unfortunately, no glossy trailer can make up for the fact that the game launched in a fundamentally broken state, and in many ways, its simulation was just straight up a lie. I'd argue that over the last 2 years since the game released, or didn't release in early access, there have been very few tangible wins. And this is painfully true if we compare it to its predecessor. It's tinkered around with its flailing traffic system, sure. It's tried to reform its largely surface-level economy and economic simulation, absolutely. But few of these patches and changes have meaningfully actually changed the game. And the broader development of Cities Skylines 2 continues to be at times sporadic, often silent of any real detail for months on end. Despite this, there have been some decent developments and wins in the game's modding scene in particular, and the base game has some extra tools and features that I genuinely enjoy using. The most substantial update, and indeed one of the only updates for 2025, arrived when Colossal Order launched the free version of the Bridges and Ports release. This much appreciated update introduced even more infrastructure and tools, right? 3 new wooden piers, a couple of train bridges, and 2 pretty nice looking waterfront quays. Granted, the quays were something I'd been modding into the game for a while now, and they mostly work just as well as expected. Pedestrian and vehicular options are on offer here, and they snap well to pre-existing coastlines if you want them to. They look polished with their concrete brick reinforced base, and they generally interact smoothly with all of the other game features. Generally. Not always, but generally. This free update was initially meant to launch alongside the paid Bridges and Ports DLC, which in the story of Cities Skylines 2's life has been delayed. Sidelined indefinitely, likely launching in Q4 of 2025, though if Cities 2's history has taught us anything, the likely in that sentence I just used is doing a lot of heavy lifting. At the time of recording this video, the DLC, which was actually bought by many players initially, under the promise of delivery a long time ago, is scheduled to release soon, so we'll just wait and see. Another big W, which is short for win in this case for Cities Skylines 2, and the only other real one, actually, in my view, has been the multi-part Detailers patch, at least as far as patches go. There's a little more to unpack here, of course, when it comes to the broader modding scene. Now, the Detailers patch released in multiple parts across 2024. Real quick, the patches introduced some extra assets, right? And a whole load of creative freedom for city developers, letting us change surface land textures, place a variety of different decorative props, from rubbish bins through to rocks. Thankfully, and to Cities Skylines 2's credit, and a whole load of credit to the creative people around it, there are plenty of extra buildings that have been introduced. A few signature buildings, sure, but mostly it's the new textures and the new regional themes that I'm talking about here. Our first taste of this was actually quite a way back, and slightly separate from the regional packs. I'm talking about the Beachfront Properties DLC that arrived in early 2024. It barely introduced more than a few models for housing, and it was heavily criticized for not doing enough despite costing a relative fortune, again compared to what it delivered. Colossal Order would later cave to community-driven criticism here, and they decided to introduce the few beach shacks and the 2 palm trees for free, now as part of a broader base game. It's a shame in my view that they didn't take as much of a fulsome approach, an integrated approach even, to the region packs, which are superb. These packs were our second taste of real meaty free content when Colossal Order outsourced the production of the unique architecture and wonderful looking regional buildings. Always residential, often commercial and office zoned as well, these regional packs add a great amount of extra content to the game. they operate like mods. So, they use Cities 2 still very much in beta mod launcher, though granted it's built into the game using their bespoke, of course, method of installing mods. The editor, by the way, is also in beta, and code modding is still basically nowhere to be seen. Likewise, just as a quick caveat here, the console version of Cities 2, also nowhere to be seen. Apparently, as a result of the code modding still being in progress, the console version continues to be delayed, now delayed indefinitely. I'm not sure if we'll ever see it at this point. Modding, though, is a great thing, and the increasing roster of modded-in regional packs, from UK to America, Chinese through to the new Amsterdam pack freshly released, well, they are great. Kudos to the creatives who made the packs. The most recent one, the Netherlands pack, is another example of a great looking bit of extra content. Absolutely, it is. It looks really good, it looks really flavoursome. You can build a whole city or little town around it, or try and mix and match it in an unorthodox fashion like I like to do in between. The downsides of all of these packs tend to come from the modded side of things. The packs are massive extras. Beyond the expected storage requirements of the game, you will have a lot of extra gigabytes to download. Tens of gigabytes, in fact, of extra space will be required on your hard drive to fit these bad boys in. You'll also need to deal with the in-game UI, that in my view has still failed to keep up with the times. It's failed to adapt with the now huge number of potentially on offer country or regional specific options. On the development of Cities 2, and not to sound like too much of a negative Nancy here, but it's been far slower than I would have expected. At the time of recording, in early October 2025, not to date the video too much, Cities 2 has received one patch in the last 6 months. A minor patch, mostly fixing bugs, and adding 2 keys and some piers. It was good, and it was all the way back in early June. Colossal Order, who have colossally botched the communications here at times over the last 2 years, have also been fairly quiet, saying very little, and no longer really updating or releasing new roadmaps for the game. They do still occasionally and again sporadically release developer diaries, though at times they can be few and far between and say very little. At least that's what I thought, until a rather fascinating update. Again, another recent developer diary, and the Developer Diary of the Year award goes to Bridges, Bikes and Bug Fixes from September 30th. Here they say they have finally finished the development of Bridges, but wait till you see what's next. One of my greatest criticisms of the game is finally, eventually being addressed. Obnoxiously snot green and overtly Dutch cycle lanes may actually be in development, priming themselves for release for Cities 2, as the game looks to try and live up to the legacy of its predecessor. Colossal Order say these bike lanes were, quote, always intended to be a core feature, end quote, but during development, quote, city animations suffered delays, which meant that bicycles didn't make release, end quote. And that might be a reasonable excuse if it hadn't already been over 2 years or so since the release of the game, and if bicycles hadn't been invented way back when your great-great-great-great-great-grandma was wandering about. I mean, come on. In good news, Colossal Order will also be adding bicycle parking, bike lane upgrades for existing roads, and other cool new buildings like service buildings, from small tram stations to a cemetery. An Old Town series of architecture assets will also be added to the game, hopefully to the base game this time, as well as a few other things they've got cooking. During their development update, they said that these changes, namely the bike lanes, would come at some point, vaguely kind of saying it'll get here when it gets here and be patient. When I read it, I thought to myself, gee, the boy who cried release date really has changed his tune now. Although when I went back to try and read it again, I couldn't find that same initial text. And I think that this speaks to the whole, sometimes defensive, misguided, censored communications here that have harmed Cities Skylines 2. But that's not its only harm. It's a graphically ambitious, gorgeous at times city builder, no doubt in my mind. But it also has a habit of not running all that well. My game continues to crash from time to time, though nowhere near as bad as at launch, and some of the lighting bugs have improved too. Performance has also improved, but a consistent 60 FPS, no, even 30 FPS is not remotely possible once your city reaches around 100,000 population, though of course performance will vary. I've read comments of people saying they can't get past about 20 or 25k. I've also read comments of people who can get up to about 250,000 population, so your experience will vary, but my sweet spot here has always been about 100,000 people. I've noticed that some areas have improved though. The game feels smoother when sort of fully zoomed out, away from the cars, away from the people and the water, and sort of looking at the city from a distance. Definitely feels better, but overall it still struggles to run big cities beyond 1 speed. Traffic and traffic behavior remains terrible. Drivers in the game are somehow worse than drivers in real life, who famously, right, the average driver famously rates themselves at like a 7 or an 8 out of 10, which if you know anything about the law of averages, you'll know is nonsense. Here in Cities Skylines 2, they seem to purposefully drive into the wrong lane, stay in the wrong lane, turning haphazardly. They have zero sense of direction, random U-turns, random lane changing, and often the game will solve this conundrum, including around public transport, by simply making the journeys disappear. To me, then, the future of Cities Skylines 2 appears just as uncertain as it was back in October 2023. We've seen fairly long periods of silence from Colossal Order, and months on months worth of nothing as far as patch updates go, and fixes too. Free content packs, or mods as you might call them, and the infrequent patch updates to the base game have certainly made a difference to the overall experience though. I cannot and do not want to deny that. More building variety and some extra infrastructure tools around trees, parks, roads, road design, parking, all of these things, all of these design elements like the waterfront quays, or the cul-de-sacs, the roundabouts, all of these things that weren't with the initial launch, that are present now, are great, but they're probably not enough. And there would be a certain poetic justice to a new game, like the one that we looked at in the introduction, Citystate Metropolis, or whatever city builder it may be, in disrupting the status quo in an attempt to do better. Poetic justice because that's exactly what the original Cities Skylines 1 did to Simcity all those years ago. Maybe Cities 2 will suffer a similar fate to Simcity. I hope not, but maybe. Because here we have a giant in Cities Skylines. In a world where almost nothing has been able to compete for over a decade, now with its sequel 2 years old, Cities 2. The first Cities Skylines game really did disrupt the status quo. It capitalized on an opening in the city building market left by SimCity that rested on its laurels, right? It rode on its reputation, it failed to fix its issues or iterate the change that players needed. It relied on a legacy that can only carry it so far. Which brings me to another question. Not just is Cities Skylines 2 worth it, but what about the old Cities Skylines 1 versus Cities Skylines 2? Speaking of legacy. Well, Cities Skylines 1 successfully, maybe unexpectedly, dethroned all of its competitors and became, in my view anyway, and in the view of most others I think, the king of city builders for a decade. Sadly, 2 did not continue that hot streak. And this brings me to that underlying question. Cities 2, I think, does not have the roster of content that Cities 1 has. In many ways, it can't because of time. In others, maybe a willingness. Either way, it's not even close. Partly because of the original game's now lengthy legacy. But let's be honest, that's also a conscious legacy. Colossal Order have released more official content for Cities 1, their 11-ish-year-old game, than they have for Cities 2 this year. Let that sink in for a minute. And think about what that means for Cities 2. I feel like I've watched a blatant sidelining of this game, or at least a co-prioritization that I did not expect, and that has been true for the last year or so. But as we've already discussed, there are green shoots of growth here, not just in terms of bike lanes, but overall development. And there's another thing that I haven't talked about yet in this video, but if you've seen any of my others for this game, you will have heard me say something along the lines of this before, and it remains true now. It's the thing that constantly gets me about this game. Despite all of my criticisms of it, I love to play it. I love to record these clips. And I'm frustrated when my big cities don't run properly, because I really want them to. There is the bones of a great looking city builder here. The infrastructure, the tools in the game are better than they used to be, but they're still a long way off its predecessor. A long way off Cities Skylines 1. And of course, for any potential buyers, the value proposition is exacerbated during something like a Steam sale because of how old the original game is now. And it does look much older. Granted, again, Cities 2, in my view, absolutely looks better. But because the initial game is much older, it's also much cheaper. So really, if anybody is wondering, Cities 1 versus Cities 2, the answer for me is still a firm and concrete Cities 1. And then to reflect again finally on the question of, is Cities 2 good now? The answer is still, unfortunately, no. It's just not there yet. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope I'm not being too harsh on this game. I would love to see it succeed, but I just don't think it's done enough to get itself there yet. And I think we're going to be waiting quite a while, honestly, until it does. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.